Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary-General, joins us now. Mr. Secretary-General, wonderful to catch up with you again, sir. I just wanted to start with some comments from the French President, Emmanuel Macron. A series of comments over the last month I'd love your response to. He hasn't ruled out eventual boots on the ground in Ukraine. He recently suggested sending personnel there, including the possibility of training troops in the country. I just wonder, sir, have you spoken to him directly about some of these proposals?
I'm in regular contact with the French president and other leaders in the NATO alliance, and what is clear is that NATO has no plans of deploying combat troops into Ukraine, but we will step up our military support to Ukraine with ammunition, equipment, weapons, so Ukraine can liberate more territory and prevail and as a sovereign independent nation in Europe, because that matters for Ukraine, but it also matters for all NATO allies.
Sir, could I be more specific? Sending personnel there to train troops, how risky is the training option in your view?
Well, again, as we are providing training, NATO allies are providing training for tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops. They have done that for many years, but that takes place now outside Ukraine. So our support is to provide training, it's to provide ammunition, weapons, but not to have combat operations inside Ukraine.
I want to also ask you about the fact of the former president coming back. That's looming large on some of these partners within NATO, especially when it comes to the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group, which is run by the United States. Is there a chance you bring that in-house so that NATO controls that and pretty much safeguards it no matter who runs the U.S.?
Well, we agreed that the NATO Foreign Ministerial meeting this week to start planning for a stronger NATO role in providing and coordinating support to Ukraine. The US-led contact group for Ukraine has played and continues to play a very important role, but I think that NATO can ensure that we have an even more robust and more predictable framework for our support to Ukraine. That's needed because the Ukrainians need to know that we are there for the long haul. So that's what we have started to do at NATO, and I expect a decision before the NATO summit in Washington in July.
Are there other areas you're trying to shore up NATO control because you are concerned about political instability?
Well, my proposals on a stronger NATO role is based on the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine, the urgent need they have to have more reliable, more predictable support, the need we have within NATO to ensure more fair burden sharing among allies. 99% of the military support comes from NATO allies, and we have to be sure that that burden is shared equally among allies. And then, of course, we also need to send a message to Moscow that we are there for long haul, because now President Putin believes that he can wait us out. He has to understand that he will not win on the battlefield. He cannot wait out Ukraine and NATO allies, and therefore a stronger institutionalized NATO framework will send that message and then force him to sit down and negotiate an agreement where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign independent nation in Europe.
Secretary General, we talk almost every morning about the potential for Ukraine funding in the U.S. to be passed and how it's gotten hung up by politics again and again and again. How difficult does it make it for you to wrangle support to get to that $100 billion fund that you plan for the next 5 years for Ukraine?
Of course, it matters that the United States has delayed its decision to provide support to Ukraine. That's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians now have to ration the number of shells their forces can use, and why Ukraine is outgunned by the Russian forces. At the same time, we have to remember that European allies and Canada are providing roughly 50%, half of the military support to Ukraine. So it's not only the United States, it's also other NATO allies. But of course, the United States being by far the individual ally which is providing the most, it matters. And therefore, I really hope that the US Congress can make a decision as soon as possible. This is important for Ukraine, but it's also in the security interest of the United States to prevent President President Putin from winning. And that will send a message to him, but also to President Xi in China, that when they use military force, when they invade another country, when they violate international law, they achieve their aims. That will reduce the threshold for any future use of force. What happens in Ukraine today can happen in Taiwan tomorrow. So therefore it is in the national security interest of the United States to provide military support to Ukraine.
Secretary General Annmarie was talking about former President Trump coming back to power and how that's looming large. And I wonder how much those criticisms are also looming large that are not just isolated to Donald Trump, but others as well, saying that, frankly, a lot of NATO members have not contributed enough to the spending and to the financing of some of these efforts. How much reluctance are you hearing from some of the NATO members that haven't traditionally contributed as much to really helping fund or disproportionately fund that $100 billion?
So I strongly believe that it has been a valid point from the United States that European allies have not invested enough in NATO in defense. But that has really changed. We made a pledge in 2014 when President Obama was President of the United States to ensure that all allies spent 2% of GDP on defense. At that time in 2014, only 3 allies spent 2% of GDP on defense. This year we expect around 20 allies, 2/3 of the allies to spend 2%. That's a huge difference. It's a significant improvement. And when it comes to the extra money for Ukraine, one of the reasons why I want a stronger NATO framework, institutionalized framework around the support, is that that's a way to ensure fair burden sharing, to actually agree some kind of cost shares, or to agree a way to finance, and by doing it to NATO, we can ensure fair burden sharing, and that makes it easier to get all allies on board, also the United States.
Secretary General, we appreciate the ongoing conversation. Thanks for joining us this morning, sir. Jens Stoltenberg there of NATO.